a BT-1 rocket launcher mechanism. Consists of 5 rocket silos. They're all pretty much identical. So consists of this base plate. Right now we're working with the left base plate. I've already got the first rocket launcher installed. It's very important to go in order. You would start at the bottom and work your way around the outside into the inside, because of the screws need to be accessed when you're putting it together. The screws come in from this direction and you will block the assembly. So if you don't put them 1, 2, 3, and then these 2 last, then you're going to run into problems later. So, a little bit of nomenclature. This is a spring base plate. This is the rocket silo. This little piece here is the spring keeper. This is the trigger. This is the return spring. This is the return spring housing. And then you got a little axle right there. It's just a piece of filament. So, tools. I need a hobby knife, Phillips screwdriver, flat bait screwdriver's helpful, a set of pliers, a jeweler's file, hex wrench. I'm using a 3mm drill bit as well, just to clean out some of the holes. So once you get the print off the printer, you got to make sure certain traces are clean, and you do that with just a little bit of filing. Maybe like an area like this, you might want to just get that little wisp off. That's really cosmetic at this point. But here are the important places that need filing work. These traces here on both sides, particularly the bottom, make sure that's clear. This track here needs filing, including this face, because the trigger will slide on that face. And you don't want to bind up because it's got little imperfections in the print. You can see that is actually pretty smooth. I'm happy with that. This side's on the print bed. That should be smooth. This side of the trigger will need some filing, as well as the inside of the cover will need a little filing. Additionally, this track right here, make sure that there's no little blobs of filament in this area here, so you get a clean trigger pull. It doesn't get clogged up by extra goo from your printer. And finally, this hole here should be nice and clean. And the side ears, make sure these don't have ridges on them. If you want, you can actually even kind of curve the ends of these a little bit so they don't have points that's going to stop this from sliding in the chamber. All right, I've already gone and pre-filed all this, so I'm just showing you where the important parts are. Make sure there's no ridges and you get free and clear movement. So when you put it in, this flat part here goes facing the trigger, and the spring catcher, see it's opposite here. That goes at the bottom of the rocket and seats in the rocket. So this should be nice and smooth. You can see here, I can move it with just a little finger press. There's no resistance. All right, so step 1. Take your 35mm screw and an M3 square nut and drop it into this little hole. If you have trouble getting it in there, probably the best way of doing it is to put the screw in from the back side, push it through, start the threads, and pull it into position. Now you don't want this up above the surface, because we're going to slide the rocket silo in with the spring, and we don't want it to bind up. So stick this in here, insert this here, and then slide this into position. This part can be a little tricky. The goal is to get the spring over the screw. Make sure that it's inside the screw there, not beside it. All right, once you've got that, you can tighten that down. And you're not actually affixing this to the base plate. You're just keeping that spring in position. So when it's correct, you can see that that screw lines up perfectly with the spring keeper. And when you're happy with it, I neglected to mention this, it's a number 4 3/8 wood screw or sheet metal screw. You can see it's about 5 millimeters. And just batten down the hatches, so to speak. With all these plastic into plastic, don't over tighten it. Just snug, take away the gap, make sure it's not loose. So spring is centered, and you can see I'm not quite in alignment here. That's where it's helpful to just use this flat-bladed screwdriver. Be careful not to put undue force. There's not a lot of plastic holding this into position, and that's why I'm using this to guide my pressure so I don't break anything. Also, check this track right here. Make sure these aren't sticking out too far with that screwdriver. Alright, once that is all good, this should slide in from the bottom very easily. You can see there's no friction or binding. Then I just took a little piece of filament and just kind of poke it into that hole. This can be a little tricky. You can see down that slot, you can maybe catch them in a light and line it up. This part is always a little wonky. A little spinning sometimes will help. There we go. It's okay for it to stick out the top a little bit. I'll probably snip that down later. Alright, so I got that in there. It seems to be happy. Take your M10 or M3 10 millimeter and the little spring, the return spring, and kind of set it up like that. Then this is where the spring gets captured there, and on the other side, this screw head goes in the little channel. So I find it helpful to just kind of grab it like that with the wrench and seat it as such. Alright, so the way this works is if I loosen the screw, you can see it tightens. It moves the nut and makes the spring tighter. And if I tighten the screw, the nut travels closer to the head and makes the spring longer. So if you don't have the exact spring that I got, you can adjust the tension. We're looking for a little bit of a hair trigger. Just enough to keep it from popping out inadvertently, but you don't want to make the servo work too hard. Alright, and then just simply cover that up with this cover here. And something like that. Alright, so I'm going to put my thumbnail on that, press down on it, put a little pressure on it, and then spin it. And that way it will seat into the plastic. And our goal is just to kind of close that gap. And again, we don't have a lot of stress here. It looks like a little bit of warping here. That gap doesn't want to close all the way. But I don't want any extra looseness in it. As long as it's not wiggling when I press on it, it's going to be fine. All right. So now, just do an ops check. All right, that's probably pretty good right there. It doesn't want to pop out inadvertently, yet it comes out very nicely with just a little bit of a hair trigger. All right, so I've got 3 more, this one, then these 2, and I'll be back. Okay, so I've got the 3rd one almost installed. A little bit of a design consideration or constraint. Once you put this one on, you can't really adjust this anymore without taking it apart. So for this one, the way I designed it in the springs I picked, pretty much the max throw is about the right tension. But if you have weaker springs, you want to ops check it here. But just putting the cover on with your thumb, checking the tension on the spring, make sure it seats, doesn't inadvertently fire, and comes out fairly nicely before you put these last 2 screws in. Okay, so I'm on the 4th rocket right now. Just want to show you a little possible problem here. So I've got it installed, but it pinches at the bottom and doesn't launch. The mistake I made was I put a torque on here trying to seat it into these catches, and that's causing it to bind at the bottom. So what I did is just loosen that screw that took the tension off of that joint. Then I'll tighten it back down and then just do a test. Still not quite where I want it to be. So I might need to do that. Kind of push it over a little bit when I tighten it to splay that out a little bit. So apparently it's this other side here that's giving me the grief. Let's try. Well, still binding up. I think it's binding right here. So I'm going to go back and file it a little bit more, and I'll come back and see if I can solve this problem of it catching. So probably sand or file right in here. Actually, you can see a little roughness. So when you are filing, pay attention to the bottom edges, because you kind of, if anything, you want this to kind of be a triangle so that it doesn't bind at the bottom. All right, I'll be back. All right. So that's working pretty good now. Part of the problem was I had a little twist in here that was causing it to pinch at the bottom. Got that all resolved. One more to go. All right, so I've got all 5 rocket silos mounted. They all work. The first 3 go that way. The second 2 go that way. So And just as a double check, you want to make sure that the triggers are not too sensitive. So if your robot goes over a bump, it doesn't shoot rockets in his dome. So I'm going to adjust this one a little bit so it doesn't pop out like that. All right, so we're ready to install into the housing. This can be a little tricky because there's your print isn't clean, but basically you're going to have to flex it a little bit and it'll snap into place. So I've had good success with trying to get the top here and just kind of rotate it into position as you come down. All right, so you know it's properly seated when it doesn't exceed the profile of the curve that the door is going to go onto. You can see I'm going to have to do little snips. Actually, I'll probably snip these off a little bit so they don't poke into the door because they stick up above the frame just a little bit. So this is held on with simply some more of these 3/8, but this time they're flathead screws. They go into 4 places. 2 in the bottom. And then 2 in the sides. I tend to put the bottom ones in first so I can kind of seat it nicely into the track. Again, these don't need to be over tightened, just till the screw head is flush. And then 1 on each top and bottom of the rocket door, rocket bay, as I call it. All right, once we have this in, it's time to put the articulating plate and servo in position. Okay, just a quick video on how to assemble the articulating plate. I pre-installed the little roller bearings here and here, and the servo. That's all pretty straightforward. The articulating plate, you want to make sure that this surface is smooth and the interior of these are smooth. And then you simply line the points up, make sure that those are facing. Don't put in that way. It won't fit, for one, but and then just take one of these bearings, put it in the slot, and just sort of use the plate to kind of put it in position. Then drop a screw in. Pop. Well, the final version is going to have these screws go into plastic, so it acts as a lock nut. This is just my beta testing version, but it assembles the same. And the same on this side. Oops. The track is oversized, and the bearing actually runs on the try not to, there we go. Bearing runs on the tops of that bearing and the bottom of that bearing. So the track is oversized, so don't worry about that. And I'm glad I changed the way this goes together. This is a little bit fiddly, unnecessarily so. Don't over tighten these screws. You want to make sure the plate rotates or articulates smoothly with no resistance, just rolling on those bearings. And then use a servo tester to center the servo at 90 degrees. And then install the servo arm just sitting 90 degrees in the middle of its travel there. Unfortunately, these servos, there's not enough teeth on it, so it kind of gets off at a little bit of an angle, but we can adjust that. So if I go to this set of teeth, it's too far that way. So I'll just accept that it's not quite 90 degrees or in the middle and adjust it with the servo limits when we actually program it into the droid. Alright, so doesn't move very much, but that should be enough to do the trick. Okay, once this is assembled, just make sure the wire's going through the little hole so you don't pinch it. And you want to line it up with these bottom triggers, and it just will kind of pop into place. Like that. And then you take 3/8 at number 4 flathead screws and affix it to the bottom. I tend to do the middle one first. Again, don't over tighten. You just want them kind of flush with the surface. Okay, so I had a bigger servo with more guts, and I thought it'd be easier to just pop that in there, because the other one was getting a little warm, trying to work against it, and rather than test fate, I just put a slightly bigger servo in, and that's going to be the fix. Simple as that.